Hello, welcome to episode 6 of the inventory tutorial series. In this episode, we are going to be covering the dynamic display. So at the minute, we've got our static display, so there's always 10 slots. And these slots fill up with our tomatoes and our potatoes, so these fill up, and these are static. These are always the same. But we have a small chest here and a big chest, and we want to be able to access the small chest and the big chest, and we're going to have a window that pops up and displays their own individual inventories. But, we don't want to have to make a different screen based on every sort of inventory size that we want, because we may want something to only have one inventory slot, something to have 30. We want a bit more of a flexible system. We could do that by making a script that derives from our inventory display class. So just like our static inventory display inherits from inventory display, we're going to make a dynamic inventory display script. So let's just right click, create C# script, and we'll call this the dynamic inventory display. And let's just have a look at how this is going to work. So this is the test project here. So if we hit play, so I've got my hotbar here. I can press tab. I can press B on the keyboard, and my backpack inventory comes up. And I can go over here and I can access the small chest, which, here has, I think that's 10 slots. Or we can go across to our big chest, then this has got 20 slots. And our backpack has 50 slots, I believe. Yeah, so there we go. We've got 50 slots in our backpack. So you can see how that's scaled up. I need to play with the anchoring because it's gone up to the top of the screen. But we can do that. We can sort that. So let's go back to the project that we're currently actually working through. And let's just open up our dynamic inventory script. So again, our dynamic inventory display is going to inherit from inventory display, which is the kind of base class. So let's replace mono behavior with inventory display, and let's just get rid of the update function and get rid of this comment, and we can just say protected override void start, and we want to say base dot start. But before we do the base start, what we can do is we can subscribe to our inventory holders on dynamic inventory display requested event. So we can say inventory holder dot on dynamic inventory display requested, and I'm going to subscribe a method that we've not created yet called refresh dynamic inventory display. No, just let's call it refresh dynamic inventory. And we can even make this just public void refresh dynamic inventory. And this needs to take in an inventory system. And I'm just going to call this the inv2 display. And here we can say our inventory system is equal to the inv2 display. So inventory system is the inventory system here. This is the inventory system on our inventory display. And we're just setting that to the inventory to display that we're bringing in. And we're bringing that in from our inventory holder script. On our inventory holder script, we've got this Unity action, which is static, so we can access it from anywhere like we've just done. And it's called on dynamic inventory display requested. And it passes in an inventory system. And we're not currently invoking this anywhere yet. We will do in a second. We'll work on getting the player's backpack working first. And then if we have time in this video, we'll work on the chests. If not, we'll do the chests in the next video. But let's just see how far along we get. So let's go back over to our dynamic inventory display class. And let's just finish implementing this. So we have a red squiggle. That's because we aren't implementing the abstract class, the abstract method that we made in our abstract inventory display class, and that's our assign slots function. So let's just get rid of our system not implemented error. But the first thing that we want to do on assign slots for our dynamic inventory displays, we want to clear all of the slots that were there from the last time that we looked at an inventory. So you can see that when we were accessing the chests in the project, my test project that I've already got set up, the actual slots delete when we close the we'll close the panel, and then when we go to open up the panel of a different chest, it'll clear all the slots, it'll just delete all of the prefabs, and then it'll spawn them back in. It'll spawn the correct amount back in. So instead of 20 slots, there'll be 10 or 5 or however many the inventory display has or needs to actually request. So the first thing we'll do here is we'll do private void, and let's make a method called clear slots. And we need to be using system.link here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say for each variable item in transform.cast transform. So this is going to get all of the children on our transform. So this is going to sit on the top level object, and it's going to have UI slots underneath it. So it's going to get all of those. And we just need to say destroy item.gameObject. Now, a more efficient way of doing this would be to use object pooling. So instead of destroying and instantiating new slots, we could just disable them and clear them and add them back to a pool. This isn't an object pooling tutorial, so we're not going to do that here. We're just going to directly destroy them, but just know that that is an option. If you want to go and look into object pooling, you can do so, and that'd be a better way to do this. But for now, for what we need, this works fine. So as well as this and destroying the actual objects, we want to clear out the slot dictionary. So we can say if slot dictionary is not equal to null, then slot dictionary dot clear. And again, just to remind ourselves, the slot dictionary is the dictionary that pairs a UI slot with an inventory system slot. So we clear that out when we clear the slots. So in our assign slot function, we can just say clear slots. And then we're going to do a similar thing to what we do here in our static inventory display when we assign our slots. We're going to pair a slot with our inventory systems inventory slots array. So first thing we're going to do is, because we've cleared the slots and we've cleared this, we can just make a new dictionary over the top to make sure that it is definitely clear. So new dictionary inventory slot UI inventory slot is the key and value, and we can say that if inv to display equals null, then let's just return out of this because we don't want to start accessing it if it's null. So it's just a good way of checking to make sure that we're not going to get any null reference exceptions. And then we can say for int equals I, whilst I is less than the inv to display dot inventory size. We're going to make a new reference to a UI slot, which we are going to instantiate. So instantiate, and I'm just going to say slot prefab, which is a variable we'll set up in just a second, and then I'm going to put the parent as this transform. And let's come up to the top and let's just make a serialized field protected inventory slot UI slot prefab. And I'm just making this protected just in case down the line we want to inherit from this class. For example, we may want dynamic inventory displays to... We may want some of the functionality that this provides, but expand on it a bit more. For example, NPCs with a shop. They would have multiple probably dynamic inventory displays, or they'd have some custom functionality that chests, for example, wouldn't need. So we're just making that protected just in case down the line we want to access it. We don't need to come back here. Something I forgot to do, because we're subscribing to this event here, we just want to unsubscribe from it if we need to. So I'm just going to say on destroy. I'm just going to say minus equals refresh dynamic inventory. That's something that we need to do. But let's come back to our assign slot. So we're going to get a variable called UI slot, and it's going to instantiate this slot prefab and then just store a reference to the specific slot prefab that has been created. And then we're going to add it to our slot dictionary. And this UI slot is going to be the key. And the value is going to be the inventory to display dot inventory slots I, because you know we're in this loop, and it'll go for this is going to create the exact amount of slots that it needs, and it'll pair the slot with the current index that we're on in the for loop. And then we can say UI slot dot init for initialize. We can pass in the inventory to display inventory slots I, and then we can just call UI slot update UI slot here. So this is just like our static inventory display. So we're doing a loop, we are adding the slots, but we just, because the slots haven't been defined here. And up under our base.start, I'm just going to assign slot inventory system. And pass in our inventory system. I'm just going to do that once so it clears it out and it sets up anything that it needs to set up. Found that not doing that here, when we access it the first time in game, it wouldn't actually show anything that was already in the inventory. So we just need to run this method just once here, and that sorts that out. So if we press Control S to save that. Now let's just go back over into Unity, and let's go to our canvas, and underneath our canvas let's just open this up. So here I'm just going to make an empty object. I'm going to create empty, and I'm going to call this the inventory UI controller, and I'm just going to make our hotbar and our mouse object a parent of the inventory UI. And then for our inventory and then underneath our inventory UI controller, I'm going to right click create UI, and I'm going to choose panel. And I'm just going to call this dynamic inventory. And I'll bring this just up above the mouse object, just so the mouse object renders on top of the UI element that we're going to make. And I'm just going to add component, and we're going to add our dynamic inventory display. And I'm just going to drag in our mouse object item to our dynamic inventory display. And I'm going to go over to our prefabs, and I'm going to drag in our slot prefab over to it. So now let's get a content size fitter added to this. And we can set this to preferred size. And then we want a grid layout group. So we've got our grid layout group. And under padding, I'm just going to put some padding in, so 10, 10, 10. For cell size, I'll have that at 100, and I'll just put some spacing in as well. For child alignment, I'm going to choose upper center. And constraint, I'm going to have a fixed column count, and I'm just going to have 10 columns as our fixed column count. So if we just drag our prefab directly under our dynamic inventory, we can see kind of what that's going to look like. So let's just add them in. So you can see that how that's going to look when we add sort of more and more. So that's with 51 slots, which is probably too many anyway. So let's just delete all of those out. Press Control S to save. So we've got our dynamic inventory here. Let's go up to our inventory UI controller and let's try and get this set up and working. So we need to make a script on our inventory controller. So let's go back to our UI scripts folder and let's right click, create C# script, and we'll call this the inventory UI controller. And let's open this up in Visual Studio. So here for the inventory UI controller, I'm going to keep the update method and I'm just going to get a public dynamic inventory display, and I'll call this the inventory panel, which is what we've just made. And here I'm going to make a onEnable function, and onEnable I'm going to say inventory holder dot on dynamic inventory display requested, and I will put a display inventory method which we're going to create, and then on disable we'll just want to unsubscribe that method from it as well, just to be safe. So we can minus equals display inventory, and then in our display inventory function, which we'll make here, void display inventory, which will take in the inventory system inv to display. So this is going to say inventory panel dot game object dot set active to true, and inventory panel dot refresh dynamic inventory, and pass in the inv to display. Which actually, thinking about it, that makes this redundant. We don't need to do this, so let's just comment that out. And we can actually get rid of this as well. We don't actually need to call it on start. So let's get rid of those. The reason that we don't need to call it on start is because in our inventory UI controller, when we set it to active, we're refreshing it anyway, passing in the inventory display. So now we're only subscribing to this event in one kind of place, which is fine. Which is a bit cleaner than subscribing here and calling it twice. And we can actually say here in our refresh dynamic inventory, we can call clear slots here, take it out of assign slot, and we can call assign slot here. So a little bit of refactoring. So now on our UI, on our inventory UI controller, this is going to receive this request to display an inventory. It's going to set the panel to active, and then it's going to refresh the dynamic inventory, which is going to clear out any old slots. It's going to update the inventory to display, and then it's going to assign slots, which will do all this. So let's save that, go back over to our inventory UI controller. So let's just test this is all working now. So let's say using Unity engine dot input system. In our update function on the UI controller, we can say if keyboard dot current dot, I'm going to say B key for like bags. So if the B key dot is dot was pressed this frame, then we're going to bypass this method, and we're just going to display inventory, and we'll make a new inventory system with a size of, let's say, 30. So we'll just we're just making a new inventory system here when we press the B key, and we're displaying that. And actually, let's just see this working. So we can actually say random.range, and we'll say between 20 and 30. So if the B key was pressed, display the inventory and create a new inventory system to display with a random size of between 20 and 30. And then we can say if the inventory panel dot game object dot is dot active in hierarchy. So if it's set as active, and keyboard dot current dot escape key dot was pressed this frame, then let's set the panel back to false. Let's close our bags. So let's just check this is working. So we can go over to hit play. We need to add the inventory UI script to our controller. We need to assign our dynamic inventory display. And what we can do is we can set it to false in the awake method. So it's, we know that it's going to be closed already when we first start. So let's just set it to false if it's not already. So you can see that the dynamic inventory is enabled at the minute. When we hit play, it'll disappear. So we've got our inventory here. We can press B to open our bags, and you can see that it's created our inventory slots. If I press escape, it'll close the panel, and they are still there. But when I press B again, it'll delete them and it'll make another one of a different size. And we can press escape, B. So you can see that here we're now getting a panel that responds dynamically to different inventory sizes. Now, obviously, if I put something in this, when I press escape, it's getting deleted, the inventory system we're making, so those items will just, disappear. So let's work on doing this so it's actually permanent. So let's make a chest now. So let's go back over to our inventory system project, and we'll get rid of this. We don't need that. Let's keep this one though, so we can press the escape panel to close any sort of chests that we're looking at. And bring that down so we can actually see that, so it's a bit more neat. So we've got so yeah, let's make our chest script now. So here, let's go over to our project again. Let's go into our inventory scripts, and let's make a new C# script called chest inventory. Let's open that up, and this is going to inherit from inventory holder, and we're going to get rid of the start and update function, and we're actually going to use using Unity engine dot events, because we're going to need to implement a Unity action, which will pass in the type of Interactable, which is an interface we're going to make in just a second. And this is going to be called on interaction complete, which we can put get and set. We won't actually use this in this tutorial, but it's going to be enforced by this Interactable, which we're going to make now. So let's go back over to our project, and I'm going to make a new folder in our scripts folder called interfaces. And we need to make an interface for all of our interactable items in the game. So C# script, and let's call this Interactable. So let's open up that script, and this again is going to be using Unity engine.events. It's going to be an interface, so let's get rid of mono behavior and public interface Interactable. So it's going to need a public Unity action which passes in a type of Interactable called on interaction complete with a get and set. We're going to have a method called public void interact, which will take in an interactor, which is another script we're going to have to make. I'm just going to call that interactor, and it'll pass out a bool of whether the interaction was successful. And we also want a public void end interaction. So let's just copy this. Let's go over to Unity, and in our scripts folder, let's right click, create C# script, and let's call it Interactor. So now that's fine, that's filled in. Let's just line that back up. I'll work on the Interactor script in just a second. Let's go back over to our chest inventory and make sure this is inheriting that interface, so Interactable, and we should get a squiggle in a second. Yep. So we press Alt and Enter. It'll add those the interface's methods. Let's get rid of them. And I'm actually going to move interact up above the end interaction just because it's a bit neater like that way. So interact is going to be a method that's called when we try and interact with the chest. So when we open the chest. So obviously here we need to say on dynamic inventory display dot requested. Is anyone listening out for this event? And if it is, let's invoke it and pass in our inventory system. So again, this is deriving from inventory holder. This event is on our inventory holder, and so is our inventory system. So we're going to call that event when we are interacted with, and we're going to pass out. We're going to invoke that and pass in our inventory system, and then we can say interact successful is equal to true. So we're not actually going to use end interaction here. This is just enforced by the Interactable interface. Stand line, maybe you want a event on interaction complete to fire when something happens, then you'll call that in the end interaction function. And for example, if your player moves away from the chest, that you could call on interaction complete and be listening out for that on the UI controller. And then, so instead of pressing escape, you'd be listening out for that event, and that would set the panel to false instead. But I'm just going to try and keep it simple. So we're just going to interact with the chest, and we'll call the on dynamic inventory display requested, and we'll just pass in our inventory system. So now we need to be able to actually interact with the chest, and that's what this interactor component is going to be. This is going to sit on our player. So let's go build that quickly. But there's lots of different ways to do this. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to make a public transform and call this interaction point. I'm going to have a public layer mask called interaction layer. I'll have a public float, which is the interaction point radius, and I'll set this equal to 1f. And I want a public bool called is interacting with a get and private set. And in our private void update function, we're going to make a variable called colliders, and we're going to equal this to physics.overlap sphere, and we're going to pass in the interact point dot position as well as the interaction point radius as our radius. So as we're walking around, if we interact with anything on the, and then we need to pass in our interaction layer as well as the third parameter. So as we're walking around, if we overlap anything that is on that interaction layer at that position and within this sphere that we're making, it'll store it in a collider array, which you can see there. So collider array physics.overlap sphere, that's what it returns. So this will be a collider array called colliders. And now we can say that if and we'll say keyboard dot we need to be using Unity engine dot input system. So here we can say if keyboard dot current dot and then whatever key you want. I'm going to use the E key dot was pressed this frame. Then we're going to loop over all of the colliders that we are currently overlapping. So colliders.length I++. I'm going to say var interactable is equal to colliders I dot get component I interactable. So we're going to check every collider that we're interacting with to see whether it's got the interactable interface on it. If that's successful, interactable won't be null. So we can say if interactable is not equal to null, then we've successfully found an interactable item, which is what this interface indicates. So we can just say start interaction, and we can pass in the interactable. And all I'm going to do there is this is going to be a void start interaction, which takes in an I interactable called interactable. And it's just going to say interactable.interact, and it's going to pass itself in and get back out the interact successful bool. The reason I've spanned this out as its own method is because in your movement script, for example, you may want to be checking the interactor component to see whether the isInteracting bool is set to true. And if it is true, you may want to disable movement. So here you could say isInteracting is set to true. And then at some point, you could have an end interaction, an end interaction method that sets isInteracting back to false, and you'll call this somewhere in your script depending on your code. So for example, we could say here, if colliders.length is 0, then we're not interacting. Or if we move a certain distance away from the thing that we collided with, we could choose this. This is just a way of keeping track of what the interactor is doing. It's not going to have any effect on what we're doing, but hopefully this is just something extra that you can expand upon. Again, this is a tutorial on an inventory system, not an interaction system or something like that. If you want me to cover this more in detail, let me know in the comments below. But just know that all we need is this interactable.interact. So if we're overlapping anything here and the E key was pressed this frame, then we're going to search through the overlaps. We're going to try and find the interactable component on all of these colliders. And if we find one, we'll start our interaction, which we'll call interact on our iInteractable, which in this case would hopefully be our chest inventory, which will just say on dynamic inventory display requested, passing in its inventory system, and then our dynamic inventory display would show that. So let's get this all set up so we can get that working, and I think that would make a good point to end the video. So we've got our player movement script on our player. Let's just add our interactor script, and we need an interaction point. So under our player, let's make an empty, and that's 0, 0. Let's just call that interaction point. Let's move it forward, and I'm actually just gonna give it a little gizmo so we can see it in the scene, and we can assign the interaction point on our player script. On our interaction layer, we can make a new layer, and we'll call it interactable. And then we'll go back to our player and we'll choose the interactable layer as our interaction layer. And our radius, let's just leave it at 1 for now. And let's go over to our small chest. Let's add a chest inventory component to it. And we'll say the small chest can have an inventory size of 10. And we'll make sure that it's got a box collider on the actual inventory on the chest. So let's bring this up 1.5 maybe. There we go. And let's remove the colliders from cubes underneath it, so we'll just remove components. Set our small chest onto the interactable layer, and we can change the children as well, it doesn't really matter. For our big chest, let's again add a box collider. Let's bring it up 0.5. Increase the scale on the X to just match the shape of our chest. Get our cubes, remove the box collider. Go back to big chest. Set its layer to the interactable layer. Yes, change children. Let's give this a chest inventory script. And let's say the chest inventory has a size of 20. So our small one's got a size of 10. So let's see if this works. And if it doesn't, let's debug it. So we'll hit play. We'll pick up some items on the way. So you can see here that our little yellow point, let's fly over here. Our yellow point is inside our chest. And you can see that I've pressed the button and the panel has come up. We can press escape to get rid of it. We can press E. So I opened up the big chest. So we press E, the big chest with 20 slots opens. Press escape to close it. We can come over here, press E. The small chest opens, press escape to close it. We can open it back up with E. We can put our tomatoes in it. We can press escape to close it. We can pick up some potatoes, open up our big chest. We can store our potatoes. Press escape, go back over to our tomatoes. Press E to open it, our tomatoes are there. Press shift, split them. We can do all of the same stuff. We can, leave our stacks there like this. Press escape, walk over, press E on our big chest. Get a potato back out. Maybe leave 3 in, put a tomato in. Press escape, walk back over here. Access this chest. All of our tomatoes are there. And this is because obviously over our chest inventory system, when we close the panel, all of our inventory slots stay there. So if we press escape, obviously the chest inventory script has its inventory system on it, and that's now full of those items. So they exist in memory, even when we're not actively viewing them. So that kind of works exactly as you would expect it. And we can move them again, get them here. You'll see that we've got 1 tomato in slot 1. Let's combine these. So now we've got 4 tomatoes. These are all null now because they're empty. We can pick them up, put them back in our inventory, hit escape, pick up some more stuff. So everything is working as we would expect. So hopefully I explained the interaction system okay. I did very much gloss over it. If you have any problems or would like to see another series on the interaction sort of script and how we can get that working in a bit more detail, do let me know in the comments below. But I think that will do us for now. I think that's a good place to leave it. We've got the chests set up and working. It all came together quite quickly at the end. As always, if you're watching this as the videos go up weekly, the full series is complete and already up over on Patreon, which is patreon.com/danposh, and you can find a link for that in the description. As well as the full series, you'll also find the project files. So at the end of each episode, I'm exporting the scripts kind of as is, like this project where we are now. I'm saving that out as a package, so you'll be able to compare your scripts with my scripts to see if anything's going wrong. If you do want any help with anything, if you've got any questions, either leave a comment below or better yet, join the Discord server. Because over on Discord, it's a bit easier to get real-time feedback and you can share your scripts easily. You can share code excerpts. A link for the Discord is in the description below as well. In the next episode, we'll work on the player's backpack system. So they've got the hotbar, and if we press B, it'll open up a dynamic backpack display. And when we walk over the items, if the hotbar's full, they'll go into the player's backpack instead. So that'll be in episode 7, which is the next episode, which will air in a week if you're watching these as they go out. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!